Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Let us pray for a moment. Lord our God, you are the source of peace, the giver of wisdom, and the one who calls us into communion with one another. We come before you this evening with grateful hearts, asking that you guide our minds and guard our hearts as we learn, reflect, and grow together. Grant us the spirit of love that covers all things, the spirit of humility that heals wounds, and the spirit of forgiveness that restores unity. Help us to remember the words of your Son, our Lord Jesus Christ, who taught us that by our love for one another, all will know that we are his disciples. Bless this gathering and all the parishes that are represented. Strengthen us with patience, clarity, and compassion. Help us approach every challenge with grace, every disagreement with gentleness, and every decision with a desire to glorify you. For you are holy, Lord our God, and unto you we give glory, to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, now and forever, and unto the ages of ages. Amen. Allow me to say a few words before I turn it over to Steve once more. Good evening and welcome, my dear friends. I would like to begin by expressing sincere gratitude to each of you for taking the time to be part of this evening's Orthodox Parish Leadership webinar. As Steve Pappas mentioned, there's a great deal of new faces here, and that's very encouraging. Your presence reflects your commitment to serving your parishes with faith, integrity, and love. Our church is strengthened when its leaders seek to grow, to listen, and to engage important topics with open hearts. Tonight's discussion, Fostering Unity, Strategies for Aligning Goals and Managing Disagreements, touches on a reality that affects every community. Differing perspectives, diverse experiences, and varying expectations are part of parish life. They are not signs of weakness, but opportunities for spiritual growth when approached prayerfully and with Christ-centered mindset. St. Paul reminds us in his epistle to the Ephesians that we should walk with all lowliness and gentleness, with long suffering, bearing with one another in love, and to be eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. This is not an easy task. It asks us to listen more deeply, to speak more carefully, and to place love above our preference for being right. It calls us to remember that we are members of one body, united by one faith and one Lord. These days, our society needs this kind of message. It is something necessary for us not only to proclaim it, but to articulate it and to live it. As we learn from Steve Tibbs this evening, may we do so with the spirit of humility and shared purpose. May we allow the wisdom of our faith to shape the way we approach conflict and guide the way we build harmony within our parishes. And may we leave this session encouraged, strengthened, and better equipped to cultivate trust and respect and unity. I thank you all for your willingness to engage in this important yet sometimes difficult conversation. May the Lord bless you, your families, and your parishes during this season of gratitude. I wish to send to you and each and all of you a blessed and peaceful Thanksgiving. Thank you so much. I will be with you as long as I can. God bless you.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Eminence. And again, as always, for joining us this evening. We have a wonderful topic tonight. One I think that for many of us throughout our careers in both lay and clergy leadership at our parishes, we inevitably, have to deal with certain situations and keeping things very in with a Christ-centered approach, fostering and building that unity. We have two great speakers. The other, Steve, as many of you know, but again, those that are new to the Orthodox Parish Leadership webinar series, which is a ministry of the metropolis of San Francisco. Steve Tibbs is the president of Blue Vase Enterprises, and he focuses on improving organizational performance through strategic planning, change management, team and leadership development. You can tell Steve was a consultant, or is a consultant. Previously, he was a partner and senior member of the human performance consulting practice at Accenture. He led the global leadership coaching practice for Lee Hecht Harrison and was a leadership consulting West Coast practice leader and partner for Heidrick and Struggles. Steve currently leads the Orthodox Parish Leadership Ministry for our metropolis, and he's also the author of the Parish Strategic Planning, a guidebook for our parishes, which many of our parishes have been using and are using. Steve brings over 28 years of service on parish councils, serving 14 years as president of St. Paul's in Irvine, California. And he supported and led strategic planning efforts and leadership development at over 50 Orthodox parishes and ministries. And both Steve and myself and the rest of the OPL ministry team, many of which are also on the webinar tonight, are working directly with 2/3 of the parishes within the metropolis of San Francisco. And Steve has invited our special guest for tonight. Steve will do the main presentation, but we have Dr. Mitch Owen. And Dr. Owen is the Chief Operating Officer of Mitchin Incorporated, which is an innovative training and organizational development company with over 33 years of service to its clients. And Dr. Owen, he's also served as the Deputy Director for Performance and Organizational Development with the North Carolina Department of Public Safety and as the Director of Personal and Organizational Development at North Carolina State University in Raleigh. Dr. Owen also serves on the Metropolis Council for the Holy Metropolis of Atlanta of the Greek Orthodox Church and is currently leading the creation of the Metropolis's Leadership Development Program. So we're honored and very pleased to have Dr. Mitch here, Dr. Owen with us tonight, all the way from the East Coast, as I know we have several others here joining us tonight from the non-Pacific time zone. So we thank you all for staying up tonight. And Dr. Owen, he completed his doctorate of education at North Carolina State University in adult education and development, and he focused on research of the psychology of change and technology adoption. So we have very, very distinguished speakers tonight, and we're going to jump into the topics and the presentation. So Steve Tibbs, if you're ready to begin presenting. Again, I'll remind everyone, please use the chat. I will be monitoring the chat for any questions that you have, and we'll take breaks throughout to field any questions or comments that individuals have.
Great. Thanks, Steve. And Your Eminence, please bless, and thank you for joining us and allowing us this opportunity. We very much appreciate being able to share our experiences with others. Paul, I would ask that maybe we want to spotlight the speakers so we're not looking at multiple faces. A lot of content. I've chosen to add some additional slides here. I don't know if I'll cover all of them, but the slides will be available. So, and they're pretty self-explanatory. So if I do touch base on them very quickly or lightly, know that you'll have those slides to look at a later time. This evening, then, we want to talk about, as the title, fostering unity, strategies for aligning goals and managing disagreements. Of course, we never have that problem in our parishes. So what are we going to talk about? What can we possibly talk about? Well, we're going to talk about some refinements here and there. As Steve mentioned, it's my humble opportunity to serve the parishes in our metropolis, along with a team of 7 additional members of the OPL, the Orthodox Parish Leadership Team, And as a united group, we do work with parishes directly, offering support in a number of areas, from strategic planning to capital campaign plans to leadership development, and sometimes I'll say organizational development, which this kind of fits into. And so what I'll be sharing with you tonight is really born from experience working directly with parishes and directly with ministries, not only within our own metropolis, but metropolises and ministries outside of the metropolis of San Francisco as well. So again, it's a pleasure to share. And again, Mitch and I, along with Bill Marianas, have had some experience working together in the past, and it's great to have Mitch join. And thank you, Mitch, for the time. I know it's a little bit late in the East Coast for you, so thank you. So for tonight, we'll be talking about the unity in the church. We're going to talk about what unity does and does not look like, ways to encourage unity, if you kind of fall off track, how to get it back on track, and then some interpersonal tips. And that's where Mitch will step in and share some of his experiences on how to get alignment with leadership teams as well. So tonight, the goal of unity, let me talk about that for a second. It's very simple, right? In our parishes, we want to get everybody on the same page. If everyone is on the same page, they're pulling in the same direction. I look at Corinthians 12, 14, 26. The goal is to work together in a common mission. Indeed, the body does not consist of one member, but of many. If the foot would say, because I am not a hand, I do not belong to the body, that would not make it any less a part of the body. And if the ear would say, because I am not an eye, I do not belong to the body. If one member suffers, all suffer together with it. If one member is honored, all rejoice together. And so the goal and first understanding of unity is that we're all in this together, that we want to all be on the same page and working for the common mission of the parish. And it's a bit of a zero-sum game because we only have so much time that we can spend in a day or a week or a month doing the work that we've been called to do. And what we don't want to do is avoid wasting our strength. We don't want to waste our strength where the same energy is expended, but only yields tension, that we want to create winners and losers. And that we want to avoid at all costs. And so we can choose to all be pulling on the same side of the rope or get into a tug of war. And you probably are aware of some cases in your parishes where sometimes there's a bit of a tug of war. Hopefully it's very rare, but it does happen from time to time. And so what we want to be able to do is, again, maximize our ability and our time to really fulfill our calling. By definition, unity in the church, it's a solidarity amongst the parish focused upon the Christ-focused why and mission of the church. It enables us to fulfill our calling, and our unity is maintained by the people. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. In Psalm 133:1, how good and pleasant it is when God's people live together in unity. And it's not merely uniformity or conformity. We're not saying that you cannot have an opinion, that you cannot share an opinion. It's not about people merely agreeing on things or just falling in line. Far be it from that, because we're not going to grow unless we have dialogue and new ideas. But it creates a positive culture. That culture, you're going to hear of the word culture a few times this evening. But if you have a culture of unity, if you have a culture that we naturally want to work together with one another, we naturally will listen to one another and exchange in loving dialogue, that's a positive culture. Let me define culture just very quickly before we move on. The culture is invisibly, it's what we know to be true. It's how we do things around here. Many of us have the opportunity to go into other parishes and see how on a Sunday liturgy, how many people are there at the beginning of liturgy? How many people are there at Orthros? How many people are there at the gospel reading? A lot of parishes actually track that. At St. Paul's Irvine, my home parish, we actually track that by segment. But it's the lived personality of the parish, and it's shaped by faith, by leadership, by traditions, and by people, and it's over time. Experts might say that it takes 5 to 7 years to fully change a culture. Personally, my experience is if you have the right leadership and the right focus, you can do it a whole lot faster than that, but it takes a lot of effort. It looks at the attitudes and values of the parish, the behaviors and the habits, how people treat one another, how decisions are made, and how the parish celebrates or chooses to avoid. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, you could all think about your parish right now, and we're not going to do this, but if I asked you to describe or explain who your parish is, what would it be? One example I have is my own parish. I was at a Sunday school director's retreat for the metropolis of San Francisco, and it was that morning we're all kind of getting together the first day and coffee and donuts and that sort of thing. And we're introducing ourselves, and I said I'm from St. Paul's in Irvine, and the person said, "Oh, you're the religious ones." I said, "Okay, well, thank you, I think." Now, translation, what did that mean? Well, we're probably less in the Hellenic culture side and far greater on the our focus, and it's not either or, by the way, our focus through Father Stephen Saklis is on education. So we have a lot of Bible studies, a lot of Orthodoxy 101 classes, a lot of book clubs, and those sort of things. That's our culture. That's our emphasis. Other parishes would have another culture or another emphasis. It's all different. And so when you're into watching the behaviors and the focus and the leadership decisions of the parish, that forms the culture. And by culture, by the way, I don't mean ethnicity. That doesn't play into it. The culture is, again, those shared beliefs of how we act and operate. If it's a parish council, that the culture is to argue and have spirited debate, that's what the culture is. If one parish council doesn't do that, then they don't. It's important to understand the culture of the parish in understanding unity. And does that culture support unity, as we're going to talk about in just a few minutes? So how does a parish drift away from unity? If I was on the dock and saw my boat 100 yards off the shoreline, I could wonder how to get there, right? I took my eye off the boat and all of a sudden it's 100 yards out. Well, it got there inch by inch. And many times cultures drift inch by inch. It's a little bit here, a little bit there, different leadership here, a different behavior or an outlook there, different set of perceptions here and there. And so cultures, remember I said some experts say 5 to 7 years to form a culture? Well, it takes a number of years to reform a culture as well. So that boat didn't just all of a sudden get out there 100 yards away unless there was a major storm. It got out there in incremental stages. And so the first thing for leadership is to keep a keen eye on the culture to make sure that it's a positive, unified culture at all times. And you're working to adjust a 1 or 2 inch increment rather than waiting for it to get 100 yards offshore and wonder how it got there. We call this progressive separation. Progressive separation, and you're going to hear terms used interchangeably sometimes. So the notion of disagreement, conflict, disunity, sometimes those are all used rather interchangeably, but they're really unique things. And to get to disunity, unfortunately, many times it goes through this progression. So the first one is disagreement. And disagreement is just simply that. It's that normal differences in ideas. It can be healthy when it's guided. There can be spirited disagreements, but as long as people know that they love one another and they're there looking out for the best interests of individuals, then that's fine. However, if it gets to be personal, if it gets to, let me give you an example. I was at one parish, I was going to do a presentation, and there was a spirited disagreement on what ice machine to buy for the festival. And a couple of the members had different models that they shared ideas and they listened to one another and they all came out with the best solution. Was there disagreement? Yes. Did they work it out? Yes. Did it turn personal at any time? Absolutely not. What happens if it turns personal? If it turns personal, then people tend to dig their heels in. And when disagreement becomes emotional, when it transitions from the issue to a personal comment or a personal opinion, that's when conflict begins to arise. And that at that point, then you can have a choice. If you're watching this, if you're a ministry leader, if you're a parish council member, if you're a parish council president, whatever the case might be, or a priest, what do I do then? Well, you have to watch very closely and pay attention to the progression. So once you get into the conflict, then there's a series of actions that are necessary. And I think Dr. Mitchell will be getting to those a little bit later, and I'll have some to share of what to do when you notice that. But unresolved conflict over a period of time will then start to form disunity. And disunity is when that conflict broadens and it breaks down trust and it breaks down a shared identity within the parish. And it requires deeper restoration. From time to time, I'm asked to work with a parish that might be at the disunity stage. And I would say on average, it takes about 6 months to 2 years of really focused effort to get the parish back on track to where it needs to be. Now, that's not something that I do. I facilitate the process. I honestly believe that the Holy Spirit, we become open to the guidance of the Holy Spirit to direct the parish and where it needs to be. But that disunity is that you have to really focus in on what you're trying to do. You know, I kind of relate this, probably a bad analogy. If someone was going to be on a conditioning program, disagreement, they're 2 pounds overweight, but they're exercising, they're engaged, and they realize, I have to watch my disagreements and I'm going to get back in shape. Conflict, maybe they're 15 pounds overweight, and they have to do more effort and more exercise and more time to kind of get back on track. Disunity, they're significantly overweight, and it's going to take more time, more effort, more focus to get it back. So we don't want our parishes to get out of shape. We want them to be very cognizant of getting out of shape and getting back to where they need to be. Makes sense, Steve? Any questions? It's kind of an important.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Steve. Yeah, there is one. Ty had asked about, can you give a parish council example of when it becomes personal? But if I could maybe a little edit just to massage that a little bit. Also, I think it would be helpful for the group. What do you do? What can be done when the disagreement does start to get personal or personal attacks?
We're going to get to that.
Okay.
We'll
We'll save that. Ty will come back. We'll come right back. We'll make sure we get to that time.
Yeah, we will definitely get that. Yeah, absolutely. We have steps for that. Yep. Okay. So in working with parishes as well that are now, I'm gonna kind of take the worst case scenarios. Parishes that are having disunity. There is a set of common variables that I've seen from parish to parish, and it's frankly alarmingly consistent. The leading reason when I'll say a parish council lacks unity, or a ministry lacks unity amongst itself, or multiple ministries lack unity. But I'm going to take parish council, for example. They lack participation in the liturgical worship and communion. Absolutely, hands down, that is the most common characteristic. They've lost touch with what the church is. During a weekend retreat, I don't lead with this question, but in terms of kind of reading the room and finding the right time, I will ask a question for a parish council that's demonstrating some significant disunity. I will ask specifically, how often are you in church? Worshiping, not ushering, not selling candles, not outside as a greeter, not sitting in the office writing checks, not in the fellowship hall preparing for coffee hour. Now, I don't mean to say that someone ushering cannot worship. I'm not saying other people, another activity inside the church cannot be worshiped. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying, though, is that the answer will be, well, we're at church. Healthy parishes, healthy teams are actively worshiping and receiving communion and becoming one through the Eucharist of Christ. That's what connects them. And it's not surprising that when there's a disunity, that's the one variable that's missing. The second variable is an active prayer life. It's just simply not existent in some cases. And please, I'm not trying to pass judgment. I'm just sharing some variables that are very consistent. The other thing too is the mission is lost. If I ask a very simple question, which I will ask in a minute, but basically, why is this parish here? What is your mission? What are you trying to accomplish? Um, there will either be no answer or there will be inconsistencies amongst the team of why they're there. And it could range from paying the bills to creating a worship experience to establishing a youth program, et cetera, et cetera. But it's inconsistent in terms of that clear vision amongst the team. Where there's a lack of vision, there will be one, and that will be self-opinion. So when I mentioned those variables just now, those were actually answers that I got from a parish council retreat in terms of why the parish was there. So they were kind of filling in from their own perspective how it fits together. The next area then is gossip becomes unsubstantiated truisms. As a leader, you cannot facilitate the gossip mill. It's very important that any comments or information is substantiated before it's acted upon. And so, churches are known for gossip. I mean, not just the Greek Orthodox Church, all churches out there have a string of gossip. Matter of fact, if you talk to a priest, what's the one thing a priest doesn't want to hear? Well, Father, I heard someone say, I can't really tell you who, those sort of things. And as parish leaders in a parish council or a ministry leader, I'm sure you've all heard this as well. So it's very important that unsubstantiated truisms do not become fact. They work in closed darkness. There's no transparency. Very limited information goes from a parish council meeting. One of the most beautiful examples on a contrary to this was actually St. Mary's in Minneapolis, Minnesota. My son-in-law and daughter, before Father Angelo was ordained, he's now at Saints Constantine and Helen in Cardiff by the Sea. They attended St. Mary's in Minneapolis, and my wife and I, Dr. Eve, visited them. And this is what I do. I'm kind of a leadership nerd when it comes to churches. And so we walked in kind of the main entrance during the winter time, and they had the glass bulletin board like we would all see in schools and some businesses. And so I walked over and read it, and they had their financials posted underneath there. They had their minutes from their parish council meeting. They had the agenda for the next parish council meeting, et cetera, et cetera. That was on a Sunday. And then I looked at the date. Those were posted from the meeting that they had that Tuesday night. So they were very quick to have all the information. The entire board was full of information on sharing the information of the parish in a very quick and timely fashion. So, but transparency, unless there's a degree of confidentiality personally to protect the situation, really doesn't have a lot of place in the parishes from a parish leadership perspective. There really are not many secrets that have to be held. Again, those are probably just personal confidential situations. Avoidance, some people just avoid wanting to have an uncomfortable conversation. And if you avoid that situation, many times it doesn't get better. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. And then finally, silos. Ministries start to work in silos. So from a disunity standpoint, then, be very cognizant of these things. And all these are examples that I've seen in parishes. Now, do all parishes have these things? No, absolutely not. But these were parishes that were having issues on unity and, one could say, becoming dysfunctional from a leadership team. The next area then, just touching these very quickly, and you can imagine what these are, right? Unless those are improved upon, they lose spiritual focus. We have those tug of wars starting to occur. We have vision and mission drift, erosion of trust, damaged relationships, entrenching of factions, culture class, which we talked about, decreased ministry effectiveness, financial strain. And the big one here that many people don't see is the strain on clergy. I can tell you this is real. and the strain that disunity puts on, because priests want unity. They live for unity. They live for the love of Christ. They want to share that. And so there's disunity. I can't even tell you how this affects them. It affects them very deeply. And so that's one thing that we have to, be very cognizant of. And then finally, parishioner decline. As a matter of fact, here's some research from Lifeway Research, Barna, Alban, and the faith communities today, all basically saying the same thing, is that people don't like conflict. And these are major reasons why people uh, leave church or attend less often, is because of the conflict issues that are at hand. So it does have some very real significance. There's an upside, however. There's an upside of disunity, and that means you can grow from it. I'm very encouraged. Matter of fact, there's a parish here now. I'm not going to identify them, but they just had a very good General Assembly this past Sunday, and that leadership team, has been struggling with some disunity within the parish, and for the last probably 7, 8, 9 months, have been really focused in, maybe even longer than that, have been focused in on trying to create common vision, common unity, and 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 listening and staying true to their faith. And they just reported that they had a wonderful General Assembly on Sunday. It's harmonious, and the parish now is going off in a very clear, beautiful direction. So there are opportunities for this. Another parish that worked on a couple years back had, again, a great deal of disunity. And during that process, I'm very happy to report now they're talking about expanding and doing a building program, because they're bursting at the seams. Where before there was a lot of internal conflict and a lot of angst. So there are things that can be done if to turn the wheel, if you look at it that way, to turn to a very positive situation. They can strengthen the community. To get there, you have to have a deeper understanding of one another, and that stays. And this love and forgiveness, humility and unity permeates the parish after, if we're done right, and you stay focused, it can be very, very positive outcomes. So how do we grow? There's 3 areas that we want to focus in on, and I'll touch base with these very quickly. At the heart of growing together and being positive and ensuring that unity, we first have to look at the writings of St. Paul. Bear with each other and forgive one another. If any of you has a grievance against someone, forgive as the Lord forgave you. And that is, again, is a key message when we're forming positive unity inside of a parish. We're getting away from that disunity. That's really the first step. But we all carry perceptions. As Eminence referenced that in his opening remarks, that we all have a differing opinion of things, and that's human. And I could ask you this very simple, kind of a classic picture, right? What do you see here? Well, there's only really 2 options, right? It's 2 people looking at each other, or a chalice, right? Hopefully y'all can see one of those, or probably y'all see them both, right? There are 4 elements on perception. I'm going to touch on these very quickly, and I'm basing this on Dr. Daniel Simons. It's important to understand that we all bring in different perceptions when we get to this notion of building a common unity. So there's 4 essentially mistakes that we all make, both organizationally and sometimes personally. Dr. Daniel Simons, he's a Harvard and University of Texas lecturer, and has done some TED Talks on this. He's also a consultant on mass communications and does consulting for actually advertising companies. So there are 2 key false assumptions that we make sometimes as leaders, as people. Number 1, we think we understand when we see everything, but in reality, understanding is in the detail. So I can look at this beautiful hillside of California poppies, and I can say, that's thriving, that looks wonderful. But can I really explain why that particular flower is successful in its growth? What nurtures it? Well, I've got to look at the soil. I've got to look at the sun conditions, et cetera, et cetera. If I glance and look at a stewardship program, I could say, that's successful. Why is that? Because you met your budget. But what were the reasons why it's successful? I could look at a welcome ministry and say, we have a lot of people here, a lot of people engaged. Yes, but I've got to take it down to the next level of detail. Or a more common one, I look at our financial, if I'm on parish council, I look at our financial report every month, and I can make a quick judgment on, are we financially healthy or unhealthy? In order to fully understand that, I've got to look at a lot of details to fully understand it. When we do a strategic plan, this is one of the things that we have to do is we look at real data and not just assumptions. So the first assumption is I've got to understand what's really going on in detail. Father Thomas Hopko, I love this quote, right? Blessed memory of the former dean of St. Vladimir's, and obviously many people know Father Thomas Hopko. Better real darkness than false light, say the saints. Better real confusion than false clarity. If you don't know, say I don't know. It's okay. If the perception is that you're confused or you need more information, perfect. Then go out and do that. So many times, or many times, we make an assumption that we know, but we didn't look at the detail and we really didn't know. And again, zero-sum game of our time, we go off in a direction that we don't need to go. The second false assumption is that what we see is the same as what everyone else sees. And that's just a false assumption. Depends on where you're standing. Who's right on this picture? They both are. It depends on your frame of reference. Depends where you're standing. And to fully understand this, the only way you're going to understand it is to walk to the other side and look at things through the view of that individual. Hopefully nobody's colorblind. If you are, I apologize, but because you're not going to really see this. If I ask you what color that arrow pointing that pencil would be, if you had normal vision, you would say it's probably reddish orange. Okay. However, if you had a form of color blindness, this is what it would look like. Same pencil. So if I'm green colorblind and I have normal vision, I could say all day long, hand me the orange pencil, the reddish orange pencil, and you wouldn't know what I was talking about. Or the red or the blue yellow. Blue yellow get me closer, but you still wouldn't be doing what. So the only thing I can really understand is that you might have a different perspective. And if you have a different perception, a different perspective, I need to understand what that is. And that takes time. And you got to open yourselves up to really understand that. So we have to understand that there are different colors out there. People can recognize things differently, and we never want to assume that what we're seeing is what everybody else sees. There's another one is your knowledge and experience. Yeah.
Sorry, just quick time check. We're about 7:12 or so. So I know
We're good.
You've got great content here. I'm going to make sure we get to Dr. Mitch.
Yep, we will. Your knowledge and experience make you unique. To be effective, you need to understand how that fits in, right? We all have a different definition. I kind of explained that. We have different parish experiences. If you've been on 4 or 5 different parishes in your lifetime, you're going to be the collection of all those different perspectives. And that would be different than someone that's been in one parish for 30 years. Your experience with your family. Do you have a family? Are you single? Do you have many children? Do you have grandparents? All these things factor in. So your definition of the experience is all going to be a little bit different as well. And then finally, the real opportunity here to create unity is to understand that the opportunity to be even more unified or to get us back on track is to collect our knowledge, to pool our knowledge together to make us more effective and really see how the parish of the world truly is. It's extremely important when we work with teams to understand this element. The last 3 areas are fundamentally purpose, plan, and people. And touching on these very quickly, and I think that many of you know what these are as soon as I go a little in depth. Do we have the right foundation? Do we have clean and clear priorities? And do people, especially leaders, demonstrate positive behaviors? So the purpose, you've already heard this many times, Why does your parish exist? You have to start with the why. As I mentioned, that parish council, they couldn't explain it. So having a common viewpoint of what the purpose is for the parish is extremely important. And the why is the heart. It is where you come from. It's the worship, it's our theology, it's our core belief. The what is our fellowship, and it's how the why is manifested, how you see it. You see it in our fellowship, in our ministries. And the who is, we don't talk about this very often, but it's our brand. It's also our culture, the way we act and operate. When someone says it was a very friendly parish, that's who we are. And this notion of this Orthodox mindset of phronema, right? Is it the way we think and behave? So understanding who the why is extremely important. And if you look at a general overview of a parish, that why sits on top of everything. And I'll just close with this one little comment here as well. In working with parishes, every parish that I've worked with, whether it's leadership development, strategic planning, whatever the case might be, every parish has come up with something almost identical to this when we worked on the why. And ultimately, the purpose of our church is to bring people closer to Christ. Absolutely. And we can use this as a ministry filter in everything that we do to create this unity. So the question I ask many times is, would your parish be different tomorrow if all ministries thought this way? So if you said our youth program is the purpose of our youth program is to bring people closer to Christ, or a stewardship program is to bring people closer to Christ, or a parish council is to bring people closer to Christ, people pause and think, how would that happen? And that opens up the dialogue. Plan, you want to have an annual plan? How do we deliver on the why? Make sure it's clear and understandable. It's unique to the parish. It's communicated in multiple formats. Here's an example that I'll just leave with you. Won't go into a lot of detail, but here's a sample plan on how to construct an annual plan. And what I would recommend is you always start with the why and your key, and the why feeds your key priorities, and then your key priorities feed your budget for the year. If you want to be consistent. And then here's some examples of what some parishes have done to do this as well. And so as you can see that there are some good examples. These are pretty straightforward, but these are all actual examples from parishes on how they set up their budget to connect with their why statement first, and then identifying which programs would be there. And then also here's one from Assumption, Seattle. They show that here's what they've done in their parishes as well. And finally, people. People is connecting with people. It's looking at the defining moment as being a leader, to show what's inside of you, to demonstrate that the importance of the why comes out in your decisions. It reveals who you are. And I told new parish council presidents, the first year, 6 or 7 times, they're going to have to make a decision they never saw coming. So they have to go back to their core values and their why to drive that decision. So purpose, plan, and people all kind of working together. What happens if they kind of get disconnected? Well, we're going to have Dr. Mitch now talk about some recommendations he has and what he's learned in terms of working with teams, working with leaders, in terms of how to get the people portion connected and drive unity. So with that, I will turn that over to Dr. Mitch.
It's so nice to be with all of y'all. I hope I'm coming in clear. I'm going to go through kind of a framework and then get down into like a toolbox of techniques and methods. Let me say this first. I've been listening to Steve, and I'm going to try to build on some of the comments he's made. So if I look disjointed, it's because I'm trying to connect what we're sharing so that you see how it fits together. The second thing is I'm taking what is really a 3-hour, 4-hour workshop, and I'm trying to hit the high points. Difficult conversations, having difficult situations, working through disunity takes time and practice to learn. So just as a context, keep that in mind. Steve, if you'll move to the next slide. I work with a lot of teams that have a lot of potential for conflict. And I help them think about strategic and positioning themselves for success. Most of my clients are in the university world. I work with some religious-based groups. For example, St. Vladimir's was one institution I worked with. But I often have a team and I have to work with them and make them successful. They are often not close to each other. They work in different areas of their communities or their organization, and they have other priorities, and I have to build them into a team. Over the years, I've developed this model that helps me understand what a high performing team is. And I'm sharing this so that you can think in context. What we're talking about tonight is only one piece of the pie, one pillar, one piece. Um, Strong organizations or communities have trust. They have a sense of trust with each other and trustworthiness. If you don't have trustworthiness, then it's harder to have a difficult conversation by nature. And we'll talk a little bit about that when I get into the toolbox. They also have curiosity. They seek to learn from each other. They seek to understand each other's perspectives. Steve was talking about how we come with different perspectives, backgrounds, cultures. That interest in understanding each other comes from a curiosity, not just from normal, getting to know people. And it almost has to be intentional. And the third foundational cultural piece, and that bottom piece is culture. Is when Steve was talking about a culture of creating a good culture. Veracity is getting to truth, getting to the right answer, not your answer, not my answer, but everybody's answer that is the truth. And truth is often difficult. So veracity is one area where you have to facilitate productive but difficult interactions where people don't agree. And then across the top, you'll see commitment and accountability, which is basically having shared goals and having accountability to those goals. We spend a lot of time in our community spending time talking about what are our goals and what is our accountability, but we haven't worked on trust, curiosity, or veracity. And so it derails at some point because we don't have that foundational piece. The other piece is on the community is about 4 conversations that I have with every group I work with. And these are 4 conversations that build a sense of community. One is, what are we going to own? What am I willing to own? What am I willing to take on? What am I willing to take responsibility for? So there's an ownership conversation that communities have to have. And then there's the yin and the yang of what are our gifts or what are your strengths or what are the things I disagree with or what are the things that I don't do well. And then the last one is possibilities. So with veracity and with community conversations, you often have this dissent conversation. And so I want to deal into that and get more in depth in that as I talk about the toolbox. So Steve, if you'll give me the next slide. And I'm going to talk about the enemies of veracity. Remember, veracity is getting to truth. The first one is we overvalue harmony. There's about 50% of the population that seeks to live in a world where there is no conflict. There's another 50% that to some degree are okay with conflict. We can disagree and I'm okay with it. And so if we look at a community, you've got at least 50% that's always trying to get out of conflict. The other thing I would say to you is we're psychologically set up to avoid conflict. It pushes us to fight or flight. And so when we have conflict, we often don't express it. So we see conflict as bad and we go silent. Now, I want to clarify because Steve talked about conflict and the levels of conflict. I'm talking about where we disagree when I use the word conflict. I'm not talking about negative, violent conflict. Conflict can be violent. People can be violent toward each other, hit each other, use language toward each other that's improper. But it can also be silent. And we often ignore silent conflict or silent disagreement, and we let it lie there. And what it becomes is gossip and passive aggressiveness. And so when you're in disagreement with folks, if you don't deal with it early, it becomes very destructive. The second piece I want to talk about is arrogance. We have been taught to be adults, to be independent, to be in charge, to be competent. We get elected to offices in our parishes and we take on leadership roles in our parish, and it builds an arrogance that I know best. I know how to do this best. There's a guy named Argus in the 60s and 70s that you may have heard of his if you went through business school. He talked about the ladder of inferences. When you have strong arrogance, you tend to assume your inferences about what somebody else is doing or saying or acting to be more than what it is. You infer things about it. If Paul's late to the meeting, I assume he was late because he didn't care about the meeting. Well, I don't know if Paul cared about the meeting. He could have had somebody in his family in a car wreck and he was dealing with serious family issue to take care of a family member. But my brain, especially when I move from arrogance, puts me to infer things. And the more you infer about other people's actions, the more you create a story in your head that may not be true, a perception of what is actually happening. Along with arrogance, we often feel things and we act on those feelings rather than the facts of the situation. So one of the challenges in dealing with difficult situations is getting to the facts and dealing with our inferences in a way that we test them and move them away. And then the last piece is about being unprepared, being impatient and trying to have a difficult conversation, maybe in the wrong moment or when someone's emotional. One person asked a question about emotions, and I just made a note. When somebody's emotional, you have to make a judgment. Is this the right moment to have this conversation, or should I let them calm down? Should I navigate this conversation to a later date? Go ahead and get it scheduled. Go ahead and say, hey, I want to talk to you about this. I think you need time to calm down, etc. So thinking about, is this the right time and how do I handle that emotion? And then the other is picking a side or making an assumption, a conclusion about the situation before you have all the facts. These are all broad kind of missteps that we can make. There's a great book out that I can't think of the name right now. It's just popped in my head, but 20 years ago about studying the best leaders. And what they found is that they could have two opposing ideas in their head at the same time. And they could actually have arguments with themselves about what's right and what's wrong. And to really deal with conflict or disagreements, you have to kind of walk in the shoes of everybody that's in the conflict. Go ahead and take me to the next slide, Steve. So this is a toolbox arranged by 4 broad categories. This is kind of the tools that I teach when I'm teaching people how to navigate in a difficult situation. The broad areas are, how do I protect trust? So let's say Steve and I are in a difficult conversation. My first thought is, how am I going to create an environment where he trusts me afterward, that he and I maintain our trustworthy relationship? The second piece is, how do I make it safe for Steve to have this conversation with me? The third one is making sure I'm having the right conversation with Steve. And then the final is having the actual conversation with authentic dialogue. So if you'll think about those 4 big areas, let's talk about them a little bit at first. Let's talk about protecting the trust. The first thing to protect the trust is I have to understand my own story. I have to digest, what have I inferred about, and I'm going to use you, Steve, if you're okay with that. But what have I inferred about Steve? Let's say Steve and I are having a disagreement about the Greek festival, and he wants to have it do something, and I don't agree with that approach. I don't want to add to the menu or whatever it is. There's lots of things we can argue about a festival, and so first I've got to I need to test my story. What is my story about why Steve is doing this? Is Steve doing this for some other reason? What's his goal? What's his thoughts? And I have to understand why I'm thinking that. The second thing is I have to think about, what is my intention for the conversation I'm going to have with Steve? If Steve and I are going to resolve our disagreement, what's my hope for that conversation? What is my hope for the outcome of that? I want to have a good relationship with Steve when it's over. I want us to have the best Greek festival we've ever had. I want us to both feel comfortable supporting each other's efforts with what we're doing with the festival. So I'm thinking about what's the outcome of that intention, and I'm preparing myself to share the story with Steve. So that when I meet with Steve, when you ask to add more stuff to menus, I think you don't, what it makes me think is you don't realize how much work it is for us in the kitchen to add all these extra items. And you haven't thought through all the extra work. And that's what it makes me feel like. But maybe you've thought that through. Let's talk about it. But what I'm trying to do is start the conversation where I'm protecting his trust. Does that make sense to everybody? I hope. The second piece of protecting the trust is taking ownership for my contribution to the disagreement. And the most significant question I've used this question with top presidents of companies. I've used it with deans of universities. When they're in conflict with somebody, I ask this simple question: what is your contribution to the difficulty you're having with this person? And this is about being vulnerable. This is about acknowledging what you are doing, what you are doing to contribute to the fact that you're not getting along with this person, or there's disunity, or there's some issue that you have with them. And then it's also about claiming responsibility, claiming that, Steve, I didn't realize it was that important to you to make these menu changes. I've ignored it. I've pushed it away. I didn't give it time. I didn't give you time to explain. I've made this a more difficult situation because of what I did. In other words, I'm trying to help Steve see that I am also guilty. It's not about who's right or wrong now. It's about we both may have made mistakes. So protecting trust is really important. And let me say this before I leave trust. If you don't have a trusting relationship person, then you need to start working on the trust piece. And we can have another conversation about what are the building blocks of a trustworthy relationship. And it's more than just character and being a faithful Christian. There are actual behaviors you have to do and actual things you have to do to be a trustworthy person. The second piece to getting into this difficult situation is to make it safe for other people. Steve talked about your why. He talked about having alignment of goals. If you have that in place, then it's very easy for you when you're in a difficult conversation to take the conversation to that common ground, to that shared purpose. We're here to do this, or we're here to bring we're here to help people that have less than us. If I'm working with a charity item outside the church, or if I'm trying to run the festival, we're here to share our culture, but also our faith in a Christian way, in an Orthodox celebration of our values. I can bring that common purpose and I can bring that common ground together. And that's really successful. Now, one tip about this, and that is sometimes when you're in a difficult conversation, it's hard to navigate back to that. Sometimes the person has a strong view about something based on a common ground. Let me use an example. Let's say you were going to launch a whole new ministry and you're going to take on this new event and it's going to take a lot of volunteer work. And someone in the parish raises the question, well, if you do that, then we're not going to be able to do Sunday school anymore because we won't have enough volunteers. I think it's going to misuse our resources. And so they begin arguing with you that what you're doing is going to damage something that's very important to the parish. In that case, the first thing you have to do is acknowledge the common ground around Sunday school and how important it is. For example, I might respond to something like that by saying, you're absolutely right. If doing this new event would damage our Sunday school program, we should never do it. And I agree with you totally. So what I'm doing in that conversation is agreeing with their why statement or their common goal. But then I follow that up by I acknowledge their concern and the need to support something we both value. But I follow that up by then talking about, but I don't think it will. Tell me why you think it will. Let's talk about why what your fear is and why you think, and let me think and see if we can do it without damaging the volunteers of Sunday school. So when you're thinking about common ground and shared purpose, it's also about acknowledging what they feel valued, what they feel is important. And it's very easy in a difficult conversation to tie, well, you're still on this table and it's going to destroy this and it's going to destroy this, and then we won't be able to do this. And I can tie it back to something everybody in the parish cares about. And I've made it a very difficult conversation. The second piece about safety is about managing what you're asking of the other person to make it, let's say, more pleasant for them to take the step forward. And you can do that by varying time, scope, or permanence. So, for example, if I wanted to change the way we did something at a regular event we have, maybe it's changing the date the night event of when we do Sunday school, and everybody's up in arms because we're not going to be able to get the number of people we were or whatever. I can change the time to make it less permanent. I can say, well, let's try it for a couple of weeks. And if it works, we'll keep doing. But if it doesn't, I'll go back. So I can change whether it's a permanent change to a trial. I can also change the scope and time. Let's say I'm trying to introduce a new curriculum to the Sunday school program, and not all the teachers want to support it. But I've got one grade that's willing to try it. Maybe the older grade, because they're capping out. So if we start there, we're not messing up the rest of the curriculum. I could say, well, let's just do it with just the senior group. They'll use the new curriculum, and if the teachers find it works better, then we'll start introducing it to the rest. So now what I've done is I've changed the scope of it. I've changed how much impact it's going to do to the Sunday school program. And then the other thing I can shift is actually when we do something. Instead of rushing into a change, I could say, and I'll just use an example that came up at our parish meeting. We have a piece of land. There's a debate whether we should sell it, whether we shouldn't, to get the money to finish the church. It's land we really don't need, but it's land that's extremely valuable. Well, if people are upset, we don't have to sell it now. We could wait 2 years and then we could sell it and pay off the note, because the land's always going to be worth more than what we would have to borrow. And so by changing the time, scope, or permanence, you're able to bring people to consensus around something that would work. Those are kind of the entry steps to thinking through, how do I make it trustworthy, a trust building experience, and also a safe experience. Let me briefly now talk about the other two areas. And the right conversation is probably the most important part. I have found in my career that people are often having the wrong conversation. There's two ways they mess up on that. One way is that they take positions. A position is, I think we should do X, or I think we should do Y. When you take a position, it's very hard to move off of that position. So if I take the position, well, we should redo the roof on the church because I think it needs to be redone. I've taken a position. I haven't discussed any issues. I've just taken a position. It's very hard to debate positions because they basically dig in. So when someone takes a position, the best thing you can do is say, why are you suggesting that? What is the reason for wanting to do that? And what you're trying to do is to get them to define what their need is, what their interest is. Why is it what is it they're trying to fix or solve? It's probably ground one of what they teach in negotiation with difficult groups that are fighting. If I'm trying to solve the Gaza mess, I'm asking Israel, what do you really need? Security. What do you need in Gaza? Food and a lifestyle. Let's focus on those, and let's quit arguing about how we're going to get there, and agree that we agree on those things first. But the real mistake that people make in having the right conversations is they mess up on content, process, pattern, or relationship. Let me give you a simple example to explain that. And that it's not a parish example, but it's a very easy one. Many of our priests have had to deal with. If a couple is having difficulty in their marriage, okay, they're having difficulty, then they might have content issues. He comes in late, or he focuses too much on work, or she does X, or he does Y, and they need to fix those. And they need to talk about those content, those events that they're doing. But if he promises not to do those things, and he develops a pattern of doing them, then it's not a conversation about you came home late last night. It's about something deeper, a deeper conversation. And then finally, it could be a relationship. Where this would happen in a parish might be in managing an employee. You might have an employee that comes into work and they're disorganized and they lose things. And the first time they lose something, you have a conversation about, hey, you lost the keys to the storage room and we had to look for the keys. You need to be more careful. And then the next time is you lost the form for the baptismal, and it took us an hour to find the form when we were doing a baptism. at some point you're not talking about the events where they're disorganized. You're saying you have a process problem. You are disorganized. We need to talk about that. And if they can't fix that disorder, then it starts to be a relationship problem. You're not recognizing that you have a problem you're creating. And so understanding what conversation you need to be having with the person is really important, because nothing ever gets fixed if you don't fix the right thing. If they're not trustworthy and they have a relationship issue with you, you need to build that relationship back, and you need to focus on that. And then the last piece is about authentic dialogue. And this is probably the most taught if you've worked in business or you've gone to classes on how to communicate and interact. You've probably heard rephrase, reframe, and reflect a lot. There was a question about emotion and how do you deal with emotion. If you've ever had a trouble with it happens with your cell phones, if you're having trouble with them, if you're having trouble with your cable TV or your line feed, and you call them upset because you can't watch the ball game because you don't have access to your internet or whatever, the first thing they do is reflect your emotion. They acknowledge you have a reason to be upset. They go, "Oh, I know that's got to be frustrating." Some of you may remember this. I don't want to give you a PSTD, but yeah, you're doing these phone calls. The first thing they do is they reflect that it's okay for you to have that emotion. So when someone's upset, telling them to calm down is the worst thing you can do. Acknowledging they're upset and saying, you're very upset. You have a right to be. I know this is not what you expected. Maybe we should talk about how we don't let this happen again, but you need to calm, you need some time. I know you're upset. That acknowledging that emotion is valued by that person. The other two are taught very simply. When someone says something to you, clarify what you heard, and reframing it is giving them a different perspective. And that's just what Steve was talking about when he thought we had different perspectives, helping people see that you have a different perspective of what's happening. And then the last piece is just listening and not arguing with each other. Trying to have a truly intentional curiosity about why they see things the way they see them. We all come with different levels of knowledge. I was blessed in my career to do a lot of work with farm operations that were going bankrupt. And I learned in 2 years every way you can lose a business and go bankrupt. So I understand coordinated financial statements, and I understand leverage and how much you should borrow and how much, but not everybody in a parish does. And it's not my job to say we ought to do X. It's my job to educate them what I know so that they can learn from me, but also to seek to understand what they know so that their perspective is also understand. And that goes back to that model about curiosity, trust, and veracity. And then the last slide, if you'll show that, Steve, and the goal of this was to raise questions, not to teach you everything, is I'd like you to have the Badger approach. I think Steve's going to make this available to you. If you've ever been involved in a mediation, this is the standard approach for mediators to go through and resolve a difficult situation. So if you have two people that aren't getting along, you start out by sharing your intentions in the story and explaining the pro and the process of what we're going to do in this conversation. You spend time learning their stories and getting their perceptions and seeking to understand by acquiring information. You then help them qualify what is our problem, what is the issue we're arguing about, what is it that we don't agree on, and trying to identify what's our ultimate purpose together and why we are doing this. And then we generate possible solutions that they may or may not be able to buy into, evaluate them, and then resolve it. This is a linear model. I'm not a big fan of linear. I think everything happens in kind of chaos ways sometimes, but this model really works, and it kind of builds on that toolbox that I told you about. I'll end with this, and then we can take questions, Steve, and that is, life is difficult, and we disagree, and we should embrace those disagreements. We should be okay with having different points of view. I always tell the groups that I work with, the definition of consensus is we can live with it. Not that we all voted yes, but that we can live with it and support the outcome of what we're trying to resolve. And I think that's a critical piece to being successful in these kinds of conversations. I hope that was not too long, Steve, and I'm more than willing to stay on as long as I need to answer questions.
Dr. Mitch, thank you. Thank you very much. We're actually at time. And what I think we'll do here, His Eminence does need to leave for an engagement. So what I'd like to do is let's do a closing prayer. We didn't have any, Ty had the question about personal conflict, but I think Ty, once the presentation kind of went through, especially when Dr. Mitch was talking about protecting trust and making it safe in the right conversation, hopefully that was helpful. But what we'll do is we'll do the closing prayer, and then anyone that would like to stay on and ask questions, if Steve and Dr. Mitch are willing to stay on a little bit, we can field any of those questions. But as was said in the chat, we will send out this recording and the presentation out to everyone. Please share it with your fellow parishioners and lay leaders and clergy. We thank everyone for joining us here. Particularly, I know we've got Father George Callos from the metropolis of Pittsburgh. So thank you for being here, Father George, and of course, everyone else for joining us. Your Eminence.
Great material, Dr. Owen. I wish I can be able to stay here and have a discussion with you. And I hope the brothers and the sisters here will stay behind. Thank you for having me. And the prayer is coming from the upcoming feast of the entry of the Holy Mother of God into the temple. Almighty and loving God, this evening as we celebrate anticipation, the entry of the Holy Virgin into the temple, we ponder your Son's promise to come with you and dwell in the temple of our hearts if we love you. Grant us then the strength and understanding we need to love you as we should. Let your love for us in turn teach us how to be saintly and religious, tolerant with each other, patient and gentle, and constantly ready to serve you and our brothers and sisters, so that our love for you will be ever more perfect. We ask this of you by the prayers of the Theotokos, whose festival we anticipate and joyfully to celebrate. For you are a merciful and loving God, and we give you glory, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, now and forever and to the ages of ages. Amen. May you have a blessed Thanksgiving, everyone. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for
Thank you, Your
being
Eminence.
with us, Your Eminence. So, Paul, why don't we stop the recording, but we can continue with the Q&A. Obviously, this is a very important and can be at times a sensitive topic too. So we'll stop the recording.